Welcome to the Twice Over Movies podcast. If you're new here, check out our website at thetwiceover.com to get a better understanding of how we do our movie reviews. Our goal is to provide insight on elements of a movie which you consider more or less important, so that our scores are never misleading. Remember to follow us at the Twice Over on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and support us on Patreon.
Mrs. Miller, we may have a problem.
Oh, I thought there must have been a reason you wanted to see me. Principal's a big job. I just want to say, though, it's just till June.
Excuse me?
Whatever the problem is, Donald just has to make it till June. Then he's off into high school.
Right.
If Donald can graduate from St. Nicholas, he has a better chance of getting into a good high school. And that would mean an opportunity at college.
I don't see anything at this time standing in the way of his graduating with his class.
Well, that's all I care about.
I doubt that.
Try me.
Welcome, everyone, to the Twice Over Movies podcast. This is your host, Faraz.
And this is your co-host, Fahad.
Today, we're discussing Doubt, 2008 film directed by John Patrick Shanley. I want to get right to it with the scores. So the first thing I want to talk about is the acting, because I think this is how people even know about the movie.
Yeah.
And why they might be attracted to even watch it.
Right?
This movie stars Meryl Streep, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, and Viola Davis. Generally a star-studded cast there.
And they all got Oscar nominations, with Meryl Streep getting the nod for lead actor and everyone else getting supporting actor.
Really? I did not know that. Yeah. I did not look into that. I was going to say, this score that I gave for acting was the highest score I gave any category for this movie. And that score is 80.
What? That low?
How's that low? It's above average. Come on.
For such a star-studded cast, you gave it a 80? 4 Oscar nominations for acting? Wow.
What did you give it?
I gave it a 95.
Okay.
Do you see why?
I can see why you would. I mean, okay, fine. Why don't you go first and then I'll go? Because I feel like more people might agree with your score than mine. So I'll let you go first.
Sure. I mean, all performances were great. They were brilliant. They were nuanced. Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman, they went toe-to-toe with Meryl Streep being this nun who had her convictions on what Philip Seymour Hoffman as a priest supposedly did. And Philip Seymour Hoffman, he's defending himself, and they both had passionate acting, and it goes back and forth. But then you also have the performance of Amy Adams. She's the sister. It's pretty balanced, convincing performance from her. But my favorite performance in this movie was from Viola Davis, who is the mother of Donald Miller. She has just one major scene in this movie where she and Meryl Streep are talking, and it's just brilliantly acted by her. She's explosive. She's passionate. She even outshines Meryl Streep in that scene. And I gave the acting a score of 95.
Okay, I agree with your assessment. However, the reason I give it an 80, which is still, the only reason I'm giving it an 80 is because of everything you said. I just didn't like the characters.
Okay, so you didn't like the characters, but the acting.
No, but like, it's not just that, okay, fine, they executed the acting fine, but it's more than that, right? If I go into like what I mean by acting, we're talking about the execution of the writing itself and the story. So this is the execution of that by the actors and the story combined. So like of the writing and the direction and plot combined.
Okay, makes sense.
The execution of it. All right, so back to my score. I gave it an 80, above average. Amy Adams, she's good. She's playing the character pretty well, but the character is just way too innocent for me. That it just makes me like laugh at some point. It's like, come on.
Because of her naivety?
It's just too naive, it's a little exaggerated. Meryl Streep's character, pretty good. I can't say I have much complaints about like her acting in relation to the story and the character itself. Philip Seymour Hoffman, he too was good, but I didn't like the character. I just didn't. And then Viola Davis, same thing. I just didn't like the feeling I got of like who she's representing. I agree, she did outshine Meryl Streep in You're talking about that scene when they're walking back to
Yeah,
where Mrs. Miller works, right?
correct.
It's just I didn't like like what the character represented,
Okay,
I guess.
fair enough.
So I guess you could call it like even like a casting thing. These characters didn't need these star-studded actors. You know what I'm saying? It would have served very well with lesser known, less popular actors who are still good. It didn't
Mm.
require anything extraordinary.
But with that, without good actors, what's there left to this movie? I mean, it's entirely reliant on the acting. It's adapted from a stage play, right?
What did you give the writing?
So I gave the writing another high score of 90. I thought the adaptation was good. I mean, it's based off a stage play. He adapted it into a screenplay, and then Shane Lee directed it himself. All the lines felt in place for this period piece, and it didn't help. It didn't hurt that the lines were delivered by the top-notch actors, right? So I give it a score of 90. What did you give it a score of?
I agree with you that the writing felt all right, and it worked with the time period, and like the adaptation from the stage play. I'm sure it was good, and that's why I give it a 75.
Average score. All right.
I was slightly above average. There was nothing in the writing that like stuck with
Uh
me.
huh.
A lot of it felt cliched. It could just be, we've been hearing not just like I'm not talking just like movies. I'm saying like in the news and stuff about all these scandals in the Catholic Church.
Involving the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah,
But this is coming at it from a different angle.
how different is the angle? I guess we'll get into that.
Well, it doesn't jump to conclusions, right? It leaves you guessing.
It doesn't jump to a conclusion, and yeah, and it's very good at keeping it very much subdued or subtle, so you yourself, quote unquote, have doubts.
Nice one. I see what you did there.
All right. So that's just my score for. We'll get into the details of this. What was your score for the story and the direction and the plot?
The score, the story, the direction, the plot. I give it a score of 70. The plot works fine. The movie it only progresses as the lines are delivered from the actor. So all the expositions coming from the actors, their lines and everything. So it's a talky movie, in the same vein as 12 Angry Men. And then as for the direction, it's average at best. Shane Lee, the writer, the director, he had the play on stage, right? And so adapting it into a film, it's a stretch, right? There's nothing really cinematic going on with the play, and so I think he struggled there to make the movie feel more cinematic. And because it relies so much on the characters' interactions, nothing really shined, I guess.
Okay, I agree with you. I gave it a 60, so below average for me,
Hmm.
because to me, the direction and even the story, again, it's not too original of a story. Sure, there is a different perspective in a sense,
Hmm.
but it really felt cookie cutter in terms of how it was delivered. There was no excitement or tension or suspense the way I would expect to feel in a movie like this and the story that we're dealing with.
It feels pretty straightforward, right? Because
Yeah, it didn't
yeah.
have like it was like missing things, and it felt like it used like a like I said, a cookie cutter. Like it used a
Mhm.
formula that may work with other movies than it would with a movie like this.
And I think why that was is because the whole premise of the movie was to keep the audience in the dark as to what actually happened. And because the audience doesn't know it's hard to build up suspense with like a missing piece of information, right? A critical piece of information. And so everything just kind of hinged on one plot element.
Well, I would say the suspense could have been built up by keeping the information from us, but making it seem as if we will get what we want. But you never get the feeling that you're gonna get what you want. All right, so I'll go with photography and cinematography next. I gave this a 65, barely below average. Again, same thing. It just felt like it was like the shots seemed repetitive. There was nothing again that stood out to me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Anything that stood out? No.
Not for me. What did you give it?
I gave it a pretty low score too. I gave it a 65.
We agree 100% on that one.
Yeah. So nothing in this movie felt like cinematic, right? Once again, I'm repeating myself, but it's adapted from a stage play. It was hard for this writer director to add anything new with the visual components of film. It does have an award-winning cinematographer in Roger Deakins. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Ah, okay. So he's doing his best with what he has to work with, and what I found like the most interesting was just like the camera angle work that was going
Oh
on.
yeah,
Whenever
it was always slanted
it was
and
always slanted, and there were these perspective shots of you looking up at the character versus looking down at him, showing
mm-hmm.
like the power shift as
Yeah.
they're interacting with one another.
And I just assumed also like when it was almost like a feeling of disorientation with the harsh angles that he would have like in the hallway or something, and you're
Oh
seeing
yeah,
someone
yeah.
walk.
It was pretty nauseating, right? It was like a slanted angle, and you see
Yeah,
someone walking down the hallway.
I assume we'll probably agree on this next score as well for themes and motifs. I give it a 75. Obviously, there's clear themes and motifs in
Hmm.
here. Your standard ones, especially considering that we're talking about a Catholic church, Catholic
Hmm.
school. You got religion, obviously, is a big theme, and what that entails, right? So,
I gave it a similar score of 80. I didn't think the film had an abundance of themes. It just had one or two themes that and motifs that it hammered home. One motif that kept popping up was the wind and its power for change. Um, it was even mentioned verbally by some characters, and that change is referring to the whole movie is set place in 1964, right? And in that time, I read up on this. There's a second Vatican Council which sought to modernize the church. So there's that element of change coming in. In 1964, there's also social upheaval with the civil rights movement and even the feminist movement. The civil rights movement, somewhat relevant because you have this first African American kid going to this church, right? And then feminism kind of sneaks into it where sister Alicia, she's talking about how the sisters they feel somewhat without power to confront their male colleagues when issues arise such as like priest abuse and other issues that may have arisen at that time.
yeah, that's a good point. They're considering the time period, and then I mean, you only get like an idea of the time period when Philip Seymour Hoffman, Father
Mhm.
Flynn, he mentions that JFK's
Oh right, that
assassination.
was like the indexing point, right?
That's when
Yeah.
you finally realize, oh, okay, this is mid to early 60s. I don't know, like 64 probably
Right.
or something.
But that comes early in the movie. That comes in his opening sermon, about 5, 10 minutes into the movie, right?
Yeah, so once you no, but now what you're saying, I mean, it definitely ties in with the changing times in
Uh-huh.
America. One, you have a president assassinated. You have the sexual revolution. You have feminism, and I guess you could say this is like when, like the first stories of any type of abuse was catching mainstream. It was being presented on mainstream news platforms rather than it being just like a community or like society whisper. You know.
Right, right.
All right, everyone. This is your spoiler alert. Anything we talk about now, we'll discuss the movie in its entirety, including everything. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and go watch it and come back. Or if you have seen it, continue listening.
So Sister Alicia's in her confrontation with Father Flynn, she tells him that she spoke to a nun at his previous congregation, mentioning that the nun told her everything she needed to know. And then Father Flynn, he's outraged. Like, why did she talk to the nun? Well, it kind of hints that,
Not just that. Why did you
uh,
talk to the nun? Why didn't you talk to the
yeah.
pastor?
So,
Why didn't you follow the chain of command?
right, not only just a chain of command, but there's almost this hint of like that there was this boys' club that protected the priests, and yet the nuns they really knew what was happening, and they were a good source of information as to what these priests were up to. If there were any scandals in their congregation, they might have been hidden up, but the nuns wouldn't know of it.
Yeah, so just like I mean, we noticed this early on in the movie. So you have these two different sets of groups. You have the men in the church. So you have like the bishop. I don't know, like so you have like the pastor,
A
the
hierarchy,
bishop,
right?
the
Yeah.
priest, right? You have those guys, and then you have the nuns, and then we have that shot in the when they're all having dinner,
Ooh, that
and
contrast, right?
the
Yeah,
guys yeah, the guys are all, like, joking, having
yeah.
fun, like, enjoying their meal and time with one another, and the nuns are, like, dead silent. They're all pretty much in fear of Sister Aloysius. How do I say her name?
Aloysius? Aloysius? Aloysius?
Aloysius. The way Father Flynn said it was,
It was smooth,
like,
right?
different.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't like it was like Aloysius. Aloysius.
Okay, Aloysius.
Whatever.
Yeah, so I also picked up on that scene that it was such a harsh contrast, right? Between the sisters eating in somber silence, and then you have that dragon in Sister Alicia's, and like she has that bell, and then she rings it, and they can all speak. And then in like the men's quarter, they're laughing, enjoying their food, and it seems like a more lavish meal.
Yeah, like, the meal itself is, like, more
Oh, for
appetizing.
sure.
Alright, so you mentioned the wind.
Uh huh.
I obviously pretty clear and picked up on because not only is it visually represented many times, it's also literally spoken within the
Hmm.
dialogue. And he even mentions it in his sermon when he resigns because of what may or may not have been inappropriate behavior at the
Hmm.
school. I don't know if you've ever heard the song by Idea called "The River." I think it's called "The
No.
River." I don't know. I forget what it was called, but it's the same like concept, right? That you're in this river or you're just in this world, and the wind
Hmm.
is
The
like
force of change.
pushing you one way or the other. Things that are out of your control are being
Yeah.
controlled from an outside force. Obviously, in this movie, we're talking. I mean, the wind is it's God, right? In my opinion, that's what I read it
Hmm.
as because think about. I mean, you have the storms coming. They're talking about it like they haven't heard a wind like this in a
Hmm.
while. Is that signifying that that God is unhappy with something? The branches
Mm.
that fall in
Okay,
front
yeah,
of
sure.
the nun's
Yeah.
home, right? And when I mean Father Flynn, obviously these guys are people of the church. You would assume that they are people.
Who read into those signs, right?
Yeah, so like when they're saying wind, they're
In a
saying
different context. Sure.
it's a tool of God to like display his power.
I think wind is pretty consistently represented in literature where it's a force of change, a force of like it's bringing something new. And I just wanted to you mentioned river just a moment ago in that song you mentioned. Are also pretty consistently used as tools of passage of time. I think that's their universal representation in literature, passage of time, and then you have wind being a force of change. Do you have any other notable scenes in mind
Notable scenes. Okay, so what did you feel about when Sister Aloysius mentions at the end and like breaks down in front of Sister James
about her doubt?
that she has doubts? Yeah. So what is she talking about there?
I think it's her doubt in God, not in her doubt of what's it called? In her convictions that Father Flynn was guilty of whatever she thought it was. It was just her overall sense of, I guess, loss in faith. And I think it's coming from the fact that she pursued her crusade against Father Flynn so vehemently that she lost perspective. I think that's what she was alluding. What do you think was going on in that scene?
Similar. I do think because she seems very confident and sure about her conviction in that Father Flynn did something
Right.
wrong and he had to
Hmm.
go. So when she's saying she has doubts, it's right after when Sister James, played by Amy Adams, says, "So you lied." She like clutches onto the cross that she has on her, and I mean, like, she's basically saying the lie was to get to a
Mhm.
truth.
She mentions several times in the movie that in the pursuit of justice or in the pursuit of finding someone who's committed wrongdoing, one must step away from God, right? So that can be seen as something that she expected to do, as in lie to get to the truth of the matter. So you think she was disturbed by her own?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I think she has gotten to that point where she can do that because she has doubts. If she didn't have doubts, then she would never take that kind of a step where she would step away from God to get to the truth, which
Mhm.
is
Okay.
she wouldn't have lied to get to the truth. She would have tried to go about it, I guess, a more morally acceptable way of getting to the truth. I'm not sure, but like it's just showing us that what she means that she has doubts, and that's why she is able to go this other route to get to the answers.
One of my favorite scenes in this movie is the conversation between Miss Miller and Sister Alicius. In this scene, Sister Alicius seems to slowly get to her point with her accusing Father Flynn of committing whatever he did with her son. Miss Miller, she is unfazed by it, and what you see out of her is her pragmatic view, which is shaped by her life experiences, and she goes toe to toe with Sister Alicius. Sister Alicius is coming at this with like this fierce philosophy of like what's right, what's wrong, right? Pretty hard line. Sister Alicius expects to get somewhat more of a response from Miss Miller, but Miss Miller just says, that she's okay with
It's only till June.
it's only till June, yeah. And she doesn't want to question the relationship between Father Flynn and her son because she says in one line, she asks, "Do I ask the man why he is good to my son?" And
I was gonna say the way I was seeing this whole scene play out, and what I meant earlier before the spoiler alert, that I don't like how it felt. I get that she was looking at it from a pragmatic point of view, and I guess it's just her prioritizing,
the well-being of her son, right?
yeah, the well-being of her son, with all options being a little bit of suffering. It's suffering at the hands of the public school kids because she's basically letting Sister Alicius know that he's gay. So he got picked on.
Yeah.
And because he's gay or has those tendencies that, I mean, he's a young kid, so maybe he doesn't know, right, at this time. Other kids have picked up on it and they make fun of him for it. And then you have his father
Who beats him for being
not good to him. Yeah, literally abuses him and beats him. And she, Mrs. Miller, is saying it's because of, the way he is. So he's suffering at home at the hands of his father. He suffered in the public school, which ends up being the reason that they took him out and put him in the Catholic school. And so for her is like Father Flynn, like he seems like Donald Miller seems to have taken a liking to him. So like why are you like telling me this? It's he has like every other option is more suffering.
Right.
But like I don't know, it was like hard to kind of stomach it.
It is,
If
yeah.
someone's telling you like
That your son
a
is being abused.
man in authority is abusing that authority and physically potentially abusing the kid, I mean, like, it's
You'd
like,
expect more outrage, right?
yeah, so I mean, this is to her credit. Like you said, she did outshine Meryl Streep, and Meryl Streep is a beast.
Yeah.
So like she outshines her in that scene when she just like has to tell her what's up and like get out of, like you don't know the business. You don't know what it's like.
To be a mother with all these
Yeah.
forces, right?
And then what she's dealing with individually, which is different. It was a good scene.
It wasn't enough for you.
When I said like the characters, like this was the one scene with an impactful scene, but it was one scene.
Yeah, it was just
There
one
could have
scene.
been it could have been more to show Donald Miller's home life. I don't know. There could have been a little character development for Mrs. Miller rather than this like 7-8 minutes.
Sure.
It came and went. It was abrupt.
I saw the movie as 3 major scenes, all with the confrontations. So the initial major scene that I saw, number 1 was the initial confrontation with the 3 of them in that room. Second scene was that conversation between Miss Miller and Sister Alicius. Scene 3 was the final battle between Father Flynn and Sister Alicius. So I just saw the movie in those 3, I don't know, chunks.
It is very much in those 3 segments because, like you said, if adapted from a stage play, I mean
It's pretty blocky, right?
so. I mean, yeah, that's where most of the action is. That's where most of the dialogue is. I mean, yeah, to be real, like this is not a movie I would recommend.
Oh, really? Okay.
Unless they were like a specific fan of Meryl Streep, Amy Adams, or Philip Seymour Hoffman, or Viola Davis. If they're a specific fan of one of these actors and they wanted to, and they just like watch everything that actor is in, sure, I would maybe recommend
That
it.
was me. That was me following the career of Philip Seymour Hoffman. I watched.
Yeah, you're a big fan of his.
Yeah.
No, and he was good. What do you think? Do you think he did something with Donald specifically?
Oh, you're asking the essential question. Yeah, I mean, I went back and forth. I've seen this movie, I think 3 times now.
Oh wow.
I've felt both ways that Father Flynn did something wrong. No, and then the next time I watched it, it was the other way. And then my views on what's going on, it always flips within the movie as well. So you have like these incredible performances by both Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and you're reading into their subtle facial expressions to see if you can get a clue as to, what actually happened. And so you're reading it one way in one viewing and then another way in the next viewing, and it's just like all a mess. So I don't want to comment on what I actually think happened because yeah, I think it's intentionally left ambiguous. There's not much point saying one way or the other.
Yeah, this I guess. I mean, I assumed he didn't do anything, at least with Donald Miller. But he must have done something in his past that scared him enough to resign. So it may have not been exactly what happened with
Well,
Donald
here's the way
Miller.
I saw that resignation. I saw it as, well, Sister Alicia's was going to drag his name in the mud, and so fearing that reputation loss, he decided to just give in. He decided, well, I can either deal with this or I can move on and not put up this fight.
That's a possibility. One sad part, and it's like true even today, I guess, it's that for her this was like a win, right? That she got him to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But he like she says, he got a promotion. He's no longer a priest, he's a
Mm-hmm.
pastor. And if he is, a pedophile
Mm-hmm.
and has these behaviors, I mean,
Yeah.
nothing's stopping him from doing it to some other kid. Just because he's no longer going to be abusing Donald Miller doesn't mean he won't, like, he's just going to the next victim. So it's not really much of a successful like she
Coup or something? What do you want to call it?
no, I mean, what Sister Aloysius did, like, it's not really a win, is what I'm saying.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, for sure. And it's not a win, and she feels defeated at the end, right? With her doubts of whatever she's alluding to.
What did you think about the fingernails thing? Why does Father Flynn keep his fingernails long? I was trying to
It
see
was
if there was
just
like a point to that, or it was just like,
it was just another quirk. Like it's just like
yeah, to
him
make
using
Sister
ballpoint.
Aloysius to hate him more.
Yeah, that was it. It was just something that
That's
he was doing that wasn't conforming with standardized, I don't know, disciplinary practices or whatever, standard practices.
Yeah, I guess. And then for I have one other question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think clearly Sister Aloysius, she does care about like the other nuns and
Oh
even
yeah,
the
she
students?
protects even that blind nun, right, from protecting the condition in which she is.
Yeah, so like no one finds out, so she doesn't like lose her position.
Yeah, right. So she is protective of him. What was your question?
She's protected. My question is, because she and Sister James
Mm-hmm.
obviously are working together, and considering the situation with Donald Miller, they're dealing with the same issue right now.
Sure.
And Sister James is, like we said, super naive, new and young to the profession,
Mm-hmm.
and she believes Father Flynn right away. But my question was, do you think Sister Aloysius
Uh-huh.
was like this from the beginning? Like this cold, very stern person? Or was she like Sister James,
Yeah.
but then she came across like these guys, these men that were abusive, or just,
So
experience made
yeah.
her who she is?
So either shaped by her environment or if it's her nature. Good question. I don't think we get to see like this a dynamic character in Sister Alicia. She's not well, she is one dimensional, I guess.
Except for that last scene.
Yeah. So you don't get the sense of how this happened, when it happened, like when did she turn this way, or if she was this way this entire time. Interesting question. Your thoughts?
My thought was that she was at one time innocent. Maybe not as like naive as Sister James, but you don't go in to become a nun
Mm-hmm.
without having, some like an optimistic point of view.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. It's just, these are the things I was thinking about while watching the movie,
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't truly enjoy the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching it for the sake of this podcast because you wanted to watch it.
Was it an interesting watch to see how the scores vary so much between like one category to another.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, under my order, I gave this a 72. That's not a horrible score. That's an average movie.
Okay.
For you, it's an 81, which is
A little bit above average, yeah.
yeah. I mean, the only things that we disagree about is the writing and acting. It's not necessarily that we disagree. It's just that I think your score was looking at it very independently of other things.
Independent of casting, right? It was just about the
Yeah,
performances.
yeah, and I was looking at it. I mean, I do obviously prioritize just the acting itself, the performance, but then I do consider the other aspects a little bit.
I think when characters are poorly cast, we tend to notice it more, and it plays more of a role in our scores. But then when they're, at least for me, when the casting seems right, it doesn't seem to creep up in my scoring process.
That makes sense. And I mean, let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
Meryl Streep is amazing.
Yeah.
Like she really is amazing. It's like so Amy Adams is really good too in this movie, but like there's something about Meryl Streep that was just so much more convincing.
Mm-hmm. There's this B grade movie that I sometimes watch as a not that I sometimes watch. I've seen a couple of times. It's The Devil Wears Prada. Meryl Streep's in there. She's also
Yeah.
this cold-hearted woman, and
Yep.
she's just as great in there. Kind of similar roles between the two movies.
All right, I think that's about it for this episode.
Cool.
Yep, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you haven't already, subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcast, and remember to support us on Patreon or by sharing the podcast with a friend. Feel free to contact us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Twice Over, or email us at comments@thetwiceover.com. All of the music you heard is from Amerigo Gazaway. Check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify.